And now new books in education for May 2014. This is one I got from the Better World sale, Better World Books. An introduction to the great books and to a liberal education. This is called the Great Books series, or let me see, what was it called? The Great Ideas Program. This is volume 1. This is you may know of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was edited by Mortimer J. Adler, who was an important liberal education guy in the States for about the 30s to the 60s, I would say, something like that. 40s, maybe 40s to 60s or 70s. He has a large volume set on great books. What are great books? Great literature and great philosophy, and so this is the first volume, and this is an introduction to all of those things, which I have read already because I had it from the library and I wanted my own copy, so I got one. I found one. So, for example, this has Plato, has Sophocles, which is a playwright, Greek playwright, Aristotle, Plutarch, which was Roman, the Old Testament, actually, in here, St. Augustine, Montaigne, Shakespeare, Locke, Jonathan Swift, who is a literature. Gibbon is Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, and Declaration of Independence for the U.S. Constitution, and Marx and Engels is the last chapter, or last book. What you're supposed to do, you're supposed to read these sections. So this book doesn't have that stuff. So Aristotle's Politics, for example, this book doesn't contain Aristotle's Politics. You're supposed to go and read it yourself in another book, and then you're supposed to use this book to guide you through reading it, and it has questions in it. It has things to emphasize what you should look at. What's significant about this reading that in the politics? What's significant about the reading? So it's a great reference book for while you're reading other books, the ones in here. And then there's other volumes to this as well. Like, for example, I have I think it's volume 7. This volume 7's on literature, part 1 and part 2. Part 1's on classic literature, and part 2's on more modern literature. Although by modern he means, like, I think it's classic goes up to, I don't know, maybe 14th century, and then the contemporary is up to 19th century, something like that. But it's a great series to what I call, what is called autodidacticism or self-education, because you don't get educated today. I think I'm very concerned about that. People think that if I go to university and I take even history, a degree in history, or a degree in any degree in economics, in science, in whatever. Taking 4 years of history does not make you educated. It means you've taken lots of history. To be educated, you must be well-rounded. You have to be able to think in different ways. You have to have some knowledge of economics, of history, of philosophy, of science, of literature. You have to do them all. And you can still get that kind of coursework in what are called liberal arts colleges, which I don't think really exist much in Canada. But they do exist in the States. There are places, I know a famous one is called St. John's College. I think it's in the north, way up in the northeast. It might be in Maine or something. Way up in the northeast little corner of the States, there's what's called St. John's College. And they have a liberal arts college, and they have a liberal education program. I think it's 2 years, and you do this stuff for 2 years. That is what educates you. Then you become well-rounded, and you can think in different ways. In a sense, I think, to be educated, nothing must be new. But of course, there'll still be new stuff that you'll learn. But I think to be educated, you must have heard of it before when you're talking to people about Karl Marx and Adam Smith. Different points of view on things. You've heard of it before, or you can easily connect. You read the newspaper, and someone says something about education, or says something about taxes or politics. A person who's educated will say that I've heard that before. Someone else advocated that. Maybe John Locke advocated that, or whatever. That was what makes you educated. That you've heard it before. You can connect it to something that's already been done. Because I think new ideas are quite rare. Often, what are couched as new ideas are old ideas. And I think a person who's educated recognizes that difference. So if you're interested in educating yourself, and believe me, your university did not do that for you. You are specialized in history or chemistry, as I was. It doesn't mean you're educated at all. If you want to educate yourself, you have to read widely, and books like that are a great help. So here's now a few books on Montessori, because I've been very interested in her education, especially her philosophy. So here's Maria Montessori's Discovery of the Child. Montessori, I'm sure everyone knows who the Montessori schools are. Montessori schools, I believe, are the most successful private school. Secular, I guess you should say, secular private school in the world. And it has a very interesting philosophy to do it with it. Discovery of the Child. I could talk at length about this, but I don't want to make this a really long video about Montessori. That could be another video. So there's the Discovery of the Child. Here's Spontaneous Activity. And here's Montessori Handbook. It's got some very practical lessons and things in here, and some pictures. I'll just say one thing about Montessori. She believed that with a certain... Let me back up for a second. One of the prevailing educational theories or philosophies is that kind of an older traditional view is that there's certain knowledge that we have as adults, and we need to impart that on children. They must receive that, or they'll be uneducated. Kind of like what I was just saying. That is certainly the case for adults, and especially for setting up the conditions to invite people to learn about classical literature and philosophy, things like that, which the Great Ideas program does. But for children, it's a little bit different case, because what Montessori believed was that if the desire and the motivation to learn is in the child naturally, it's part of what it is to be a human child, is to seek stimulation. All you have to do as a teacher then is to set up the certain environmental conditions to take advantage of that. Montessori did not advocate ramrodding children with ideas and different beliefs and things like that, and like nailing down children into desks where they are indoctrinated from the front. She believed that children had a spontaneous activity that was ready, that was there, that could be activated if certain environmental conditions were met. Certain stimulating toys. So for example, Maria Montessori would experiment with toys that the kids like to play with, she would keep in. And of course, that had some pedagogical advantage or benefit. And toys that she thought had some pedagogical benefit, but the kids would play with, she would then change. So even her toys, she called them didactic materials. Even her toys, she kind of scientifically would design what the kids like to play with and had a pedagogical use. But like I said, she believed that with a good environment, there's no motivational issue. The reason why traditional schools have motivation problems, you hear about that all the time in schools today, is because they're trying to do things that the kids don't want to do, they don't like. Montessori got rid of the motivation problem by bringing them together, by having activities and toys that are both interesting and stimulating and have some educational value. So that's her. That's like a real quick basis of what she thinks about what happens with education. Education as emergent from the child within certain environmental conditions are met. Okay, and here's a book related to that. This is actually a library book that was a discard. Philosophical Foundations of Education by Cahn. There's a second edition version of this book out right now, but this is the first edition, so it's a bit dated, but it's free and on stuff I like. So this is a book that contains all kinds of educational philosophers and their ideas on education, of course, such as Plato, Aristotle, John Locke, Rousseau, Cant, John Dewey, Whitehead, Bertrand Russell, Jacques Maritain, Sidney Hook, and then himself, Richard Peters, Israel Scheffler, Jane Roland Martin, Gilbert Ryle. Most of these guys are philosophers, and some of them are education philosophers. So that's nice to have around. Here's the next one. You may know the author. Illiberal Education, Dinesh D'Souza. The Politics of Race and Sex on Campus. So Dinesh D'Souza, of course, is a Christian, debated lots with Christopher Hitchens on atheism. He's obviously religious, so he doesn't believe in atheism and doesn't agree with it. But he's also a conservative, and so he's talking about what's happening with education, that it's not disinterested anymore on the university campuses. The university campuses are biased, that university professors tend to be left-wing, of course, for their own interests, because they want more grants, they want more money from the government, so of course they're on the social side. There's no surprise. And what he's talking about here is he's talking about censorship. He's talking about how race and gender has infected the universities, creating a kind of narrative about racism that happens today, or sexism that happens today, and how we have to change. We have to get rid of those things and create affirmative action programs which discriminate against majorities in favor of minorities, and all these kinds of things. And so he's trying to say that education has not become a disinterested task anymore. It's now infected with politics. And that's always going to be the case if the government runs education. So I don't know. Like, that seems to be the fundamental issue, really. Here's why this is a famous book in the past, I don't know, when was this written, the 60s or something? Why Johnny Can't Read and What You Can Do About It by Flesch. So this is a famous book. This is 85. Oh no, 55, there we go. And I thought it was a lot older. 55 is when it was first written. The classic book on phonics. So this book, I believe, is about what happened in the past, where what's called the whole language movement came in and required teachers to teach reading differently and teach kids to infer what words were based on a context, not sound out words. Phonics is sounding out words. So phonics teaches you letter sounds and what a P sounds like, what an S sounds like, what a T sounds like, and then what TH sounds like, what PH sounds like, etc. And so kids would sound out words, and then they get the word, and then, there's the word. And so reading is that. Reading, at least initially, is the sounding of a word, especially new words. And even adults, you come across a new word, what the hell is that? You sound it out. You try to think, okay, well, what is the word? Can I get a grasp of how the word sounds? And then you find out its meaning. And then, of course, as you get more experience in reading then tends to become by sight. You don't sound out words anymore. You read, it just instantly pops into your mind what that word is, in a sense, and you memorize the words over time through lots and lots of experience. And that's how we quickly read. But that's not how we teach reading. And that's the issue. And so Why Johnny Can't Think is about what happened with getting rid of phonics and requiring kids to memorize words, not through experience like adults, like us, who are very, we see the words over and over and over again, and so it just becomes retained in memory what they are, and that's how we read very fast. We're going to teach the kids that way too. And so it becomes a grueling process. Apparently it created all kinds of, what's that disorder called where they can't read? I can't remember now, but created all kinds of problems with reading. And so this book was a famous book about, the reason is because of this new method you're using. So that's a classic book on literacy. And here's another classic book, although it's not really that well known, but by Marva Collins. Marva Collins' Way, Returning to Excellence in Education. So Marva Collins was a African-American teacher who taught in rough schools, and like Dinesh D'Souza's book, talking about politics of race and sex, part of that issue was that what we were saying to people, especially minorities, racial minorities, was that you're leading a life that's been damaged by a history of racism and slavery, even in some cases. And so the reason why life is hard for you now is because of that. Therefore, we're going to forgive you for not excelling as well as whites. Marva Collins would think that's a horrible philosophy. that it condemns people to accept their social circumstances. The same kind of rhetoric was said to people in poverty, that they weren't the cause of their poverty, that society is the cause of their poverty. And so they shouldn't feel about it themselves. They shouldn't change their ways. They shouldn't try to improve themselves. They're imprisoned. It's not their fault. Marva Collins would think that is horrible. That kind of philosophy condemns people to their circumstances. Marva Collins was a hard teacher on all kids, especially because she was in rougher schools, probably predominantly black schools. She pressed hard for those kids to do well. Thomas Sowell talks about the same kinds of things. He's a African-American economist, famous economist in the States. He was driven hard to do well, and he did. So that's Marva Collins' philosophy, is that she doesn't put up with any nonsense, and she drives people to do well, to excel, and not put up with excuses and historical trauma that may or may not exist. So I'm interested to kind of read all of it, read her points of view on those kinds of things. But I think that's where she's coming from. So that's my books and my new books in education. So now will be history.